She had almost given up on ever meeting that special someone. At the age of 36, Bridget Callahan had embraced the fact that she might end up alone for the rest of her life, just like her late Aunt Alana, who had died in her home when Bridget was no more than 10 years old. Bridget still remembered the horror she had felt when she was told that her aunt had been dead for weeks when she was found. Bridget hated thinking about how lonesome her aunt must have been to the very end of her life, and she didn't like the fact that she might end up just like her. So, back then, when she had been no more than 10, on the brink of her life beginning, she had decided to never let such a horrific fate overcome her. But life seldom turns out the way we wished for it to as children, and so it happened that Bridget now found herself alone in her small house in Enniskerry, with no one but her cats to keep her company. There were days when she was terrified of her future, where she would wake up alone in her bed sweating from a nightmare. But now, things seemed to have changed. Finally, after years of praying, she had met a man, a nice and decent man. Michael was his name. Bridget knew she wasn't as attractive as she had been in her younger years, but she wasn't ugly either. As a matter of fact, people still told her she was quite beautiful. That's why many in the small town wondered why she had never married and had children, like all the other girls of the town. Bridget wondered that herself. Some believed she was simply too beautiful for a man to handle. They simply feared her because she was so out of their league. She had dated her share of men throughout the years, but only a few had stuck around long enough for her to get to know them properly, and the only one she'd ever managed to actually dream of a future with had turned out to have a wife and children in Dublin. Bridget smiled at her reflection in the mirror and brushed her long blonde hair, thinking of this man that she had met. What she liked the most about him was the fact that he wasn't from Enniskerry. He had come to town just a few weeks ago, he said, and as soon as he had laid his eyes on her at the florist where she worked, he knew she was the one for him. That's what he told her while buying one bouquet of red roses after the other, and telling her that they were all for her, and he wasn't going to stop buying roses from her store until she agreed to go out on a date with him. Bridget had refused at first, but the man came back the next day and bought red roses from her store till there were no more. The very next day, he had returned and started all over, until she had finally told him to stop it. She argued that he was going to go broke on buying red roses, and she couldn't let that happen. "So you'll agree to go out with me?" he asked with a handsome smile. Bridget felt a tickling sensation inside, and she knew then that she liked him. Never had a man pursued her like this before, and she had to admit she really liked it. She liked the way he looked at her. She liked the way he spoke her name, how he tasted it like it was special. Could he be the one? She asked her own reflection as she put on makeup. If that was the case, then it was certainly worth the wait. Now, Bridget wasn't stupid. She knew he was from out of town and just moved there. She knew almost nothing about him, and for all she knew, he could have an entire family somewhere, or he could be some pervert. In fact, that was why she had said no to him the first 2 days he had come to her store. But now she had decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. He deserved that much for his effort. And Bridget realized that this might be her last chance of finding someone to grow old with. Someone who could make sure she wasn't left to die on her living room floor alone. She felt hopeful that it wasn't too late for her. She never wanted children anyway, so that part didn't bother her much. It was the loneliness, the sadness of having no one in her life, that made her miserable. The doorbell rang and Bridget got up. She rushed to the door with all the anticipation of a first date, and then swung it open with a big smile. "Hi!" The sight of the handsome man made her blush, and she felt silly. He was wearing a nice gray suit, and in his hand he was holding a single red rose. "Hello there," he said, and handed her the rose. It still amazed her how he could have known that it was her favorite among flowers. It was very seldom that florists liked a flower as ordinary as the red rose. But it had always been her favorite. The fact that he knew that somehow told her he just might be the one. He just might. He reached out his arm so she could grab it. "Shall we?"